Morrow of the Golden Age, Chapter 10. The Carpiani tribe was hard at work, driving mountain folk from the passes that divided the steppe from the belligerent Kingdom of the Getae, and it was their advance into which Prince Parysades was drawn in the autumn of 183. Under ordinary circumstances, these passes were like open windows on a temple vault, from which any tribute the Carpiani owed the Bosporans were stealthily withdrawn. However, on this occasion, the harassment the Carpiani had been committing for the entire year, in a tantrum that their goals at the Olbian colony had been thwarted, had alerted the Getae to the coming of not only these raids, but Parysades. Therefore, when Parysades brought his army to camp at the mouth of the pass, he found that various chieftains responsible for its defense had come out to the Carpiani side and had slaughtered several small warbands trapped between the mountains there. They did not hesitate to challenge for battle, and the prince did not hesitate to accept. The engagement that occurred is a superb case study of how the old half-men from the time of the collapse were lesser than those that came before or after, which I can state because most people agree that the people who betrayed Manos at the time were most closely represented today by the people who live in this region north of the Istros River, whose culture was incredibly insular on account of their unique geography. I will expand on this later, for you no doubt have questions. The area is usually called Thracia or Daxia, with little regard for where that name should begin or cease to apply. Similarly, it was called Daxia by the Lithosis, who knew it from ancestral memory as the site of many battles from the era of the Fall, on which I beg patience of you to know more. The first event in the battle was the advance of the Getae horse, who were trained and equipped in a wholly different way to those on the steppe. Their shields were round and fronted with metals, a mark of civilization, yet they did not carry bows, and relied only on thrown spears and the speed of their mounts to assail their foes. They came upon the thick line of Lithosis and Bosporan cavalry, and despaired as the air filled with arrows. They were outranged and outnumbered, apparently having not believed this would be the case, and were scattered or killed as arrows found their violent rest amid the formation. This filled the Bosporans with joy, and the rest of the day would carry their mirth well. Not concerned with the rapid loss of their vanguard, the Getae army deployed in the pass. Do not imagine this was an impediment to movement, for this pass, called Petrodava by the Carpiani after the mountain of the same name that loomed over its northern slopes, was 2 or more stadies across. Only a mounted force could render it impassable to raiders, and such a force was busy fleeing or making their case before the gods. Without an order needing to be given, the Lithosis went out and surrounded the few thousand infantry in the pass. They had not even arrayed themselves in a line, perhaps hoping the forested slopes of the pass would deter the Lithosis, and we can laugh along with our heroes at the thought of this being the case. Once the archers began to shoot, the fate of the Getae was sealed. To explain this, we look at another military weakness that had been rendered by the degeneration of the first men. Getae warriors did not wear armour, and in most cases they did not carry shields, and this can only be explained by a disdain they held for their own lives that originates in the knowledge of their insignificance. They carried a weapon called a falx that has a long curved blade and is heavy enough to require 2 hands to wield it. In Greece, this weapon is known for cleaving through armour and bone alike, and it was feared by those not familiar with its drawbacks. The Lithosis knew not this fear, and saw the drawbacks clearly. The Getae men were pierced with arrows, whistling across the field without care for bravado or spirit, and all who saw it knew that there was a hope for a return to the well-ordered times of the Golden Age yet. Victory was on the lips of all, and the army prepared to move their camp through the pass even though it was, by then, late in the autumn. By camping on the other side of the pass, the Getae would not be given peace of mind, nor would the expedition have any distractions to pull them away from their duty, which often arise when an army sits in friendly territory for a long time. Before this move was completed, Gwena Greek-speaker approached Parysades and announced her departure, a horrifying thing to hear for the Greeks. It was not as bad as they feared. She was passing command of her warriors over to the prince directly for the first time, having felt that his achievements had been so pronounced as to overcome the natural aversion the forest folk had to the rulings of the half-men. At the symposium preceding her parting, Gwena outraged the Greeks by standing upon a table and making a speech as if she were raising a mob for some foul deed. Here is what she said. "The world is vaster than any of us can know and wishes to grow larger. It does not, because Manos cannot control his magic. This causes life to fade. First it does not shine, then it is dark. The small will go first, the flies. The middling go next, the beasts. The men follow. Then the land becomes water again. The end is when magic is gone, and the spells of Manos, Taurus and Yimo are undone. This is the end of everything, and all that has been will never have been. No hope for life will remain. Never forget that this is true. Because this is true, there is nothing you should not do. No one knows what course is right. Everyone here must know what course is wrong. All of you will find out what to do." This is the important part of it. It did not elicit much reaction from the gathered officers, who did not understand the meaning of it. Pyracetes wrote to his brother of this night with the phrase, "A burden is upon me, and our mutual profit alone can lift it." I say that this burden was the weight of saving the world from the fate that Gwena Greek-speaker prophesied, and that the mutual profit was a sly ambiguity that might be read either as salvation or as simple military achievement for the empire, an avenue of comprehension left open deliberately by the tactful prince. Could he have known who else but his brother would end up reading his correspondence? Such is the voyeuristic nature of historians to hardly think of the wrongdoing in all this. Once Gwena had left eastward, to what business we do not know, the army carried on through the pass to winter in Getae lands. This went as planned, until the camp was approached by a gang led by 3 enemy chieftains. Their names were Ketroporos, Amadokas, and Rescuporis, and one of them was rather unlike the others, as the events of the day demonstrated. These men were famous among their kin, and you'll find extended tales of their previous exploits transcribed from folk tales told in this region at the time, although some decades passed before they were first written down by the Greeks, and I doubt the truth of much of them. Yet the miracles that occurred with firm testament on this particular day are the most striking evidence of the heroic abilities of the one called Amadokas. This gang approached the Bosporan camp as if challenging for battle, although it was too small to seriously contend. The prince formed up and had scouts racing in all directions, certain that a trap was being sprung at another location while his troops watered at the mouth in the face of an easy victory. Nothing of the sort could be found. It was concluded that perhaps this party was not a small army, but a large embassy, and that there was something they wished to say that might profit the Bosporans. The army advanced carefully and split into various groups that quietly surrounded their foe, while Pyracetes and Diotrephes led some companions and educated slaves to interpret the meeting. First, the 3 chiefs asked which god had sent the prince here, to which he first replied Zeus, then Manos. They claimed that Zeus was not to be trusted, calling him by the name Duos, and that Manos did not exist. The prince inquired on the first claim, and the chiefs said that the gods of the modern age were not like those of the Golden Age. They made no secret of their knowledge of this age, and in so openly talking about it, they likely did not understand how they were damning themselves to be hunted, or it may be that they truly did not foresee defeat. The prince now changed tact and spoke more in line with Lithos' religion, saying that Zeus was a being created by the power of the half-men after their alienation from the true power of Manos, Taurus and Yimo, and this brought shouts of disagreement from the Getae standing nearby. A battle was narrowly avoided because the chiefs intervened, and they said that what the prince had claimed was an old lie that required expunging from history. For this they had no evidence, but all there knew that for them to be even speaking on this topic meant there had to be a repository of knowledge in their possession, so any doubt that remained was gone. The prince asked the chiefs to withdraw, which they echoed back. The prince declared that he intended to make any who did not understand the danger the world was in submit to him, and, almost laughing, the chiefs had something very similar to say in return. Since they did not want to say more, and appeared driven by conviction equal to those of the Bosporans, the negotiations failed, and it was agreed that a battle would take place at noon. The Getae did not use their time to prepare, and simply stood where they were, conversing and showing off their state of disorder. The Leuthosis loaded their horses with spare arrows and intensified their fruitless scouting of the surrounds. When the time of battle came, the Leuthosis closed ranks and presented 2,000 bows to the Getae's 1,000 spears and falxes. Arrows went across the open field and applied their effect, and the Getae seemed to rejoice in their own slaughter, throwing aside clothing and jumping upon their dead in a playful fashion. Into this orgy of pain went the two chiefs, Ketriporos and Reskuporis, while the third chief, Amadokas, went to the front with a tall shield and heavy armour that protected him fully. As the number of Getae dwindled, the riders closed in to be more precise, and those shooting from behind were able to score a number of hits on Amadokas on his unshielded side. The chief looked around and saw that he was the last of his party standing. Some others were still alive with their wounds on the ground. With astounding calmness, he turned away from his foe and marched with neither haste nor lack of purpose. The Leuthosis were not ashamed to shoot at his back as he went. The hissing of their arrows was like a gently lapping sea, while the wounded men on the ground calling out to Amadokas were like squawking birds, and this scene was so strange that no one on the Bosporan side said anything, creating for a second the image that each man was alone there, watching Amadokas stride off with a muddy plumage of arrows in his back. That is not to say the shooting of arrows relented. On the contrary, the desperation to put this defiant survivor down reignited the hearts of the archers after the misery of the scene had begun to douse them. Horses trampled over the killing grounds, although Greek-trained mounts did not allow themselves to behave like this, and Amadokas was pursued by jeers and clacking bows. Not once did he turn around to check on the bloodthirsty entourage gathering at his back. No, he led them away with natural flair, as arrows ploughed the earth as if they were eager to become worms and burrow away. You think that this scene is unusual, no doubt, yet it had only begun. When shot at a distance, the arrows invariably missed their target, and when shot closely, they would bounce from Amadokas' armour, or indeed from the foliage of arrows already lodged in place. Since the Leuthosis were archers from the day they were born, making sport and profession of the art, they endured horrid blows to their reputations. How could they not bring down this single strolling gentleman? Once they were overcome with fury, they threw their bows aside and raced forward with lances to try and salvage the scene. When they were close, Amadokas turned around to look at them. Given the incredible things this man seemed capable of, the Leuthosis were now terrified by his very gaze. I have described before how the steppe peoples often made extrapolations into myth when they sensed greatness, and here Amadokas would have appeared to them no longer to be a man, but something more. A few riders were able to attack him, but he did not receive any blows. The most that was achieved was that he brought up his sword to turn aside one of the lances, and this small motion of his arm produced an audible gasp among the riders. After this they backed away, and with his exercise no longer disturbed, Amadokas paced away with his weapons swaying at his side. What was at play here? First I will tell you what was not happening, and then what was, so that you are equipped with all the arguments you need when someone brings this event up. Some will claim that Leuthosis arrows are simply incapable of breaking through armour that is sufficiently well made, and since the Getae nobles were wealthy and their people skilled, the armour used on battlefields such as these was of quality equal to the Persians. Leuthosis arrowheads in particular draw much derision because they are usually made from sharpened stones and not metal. People add that metal is hard to find in the deep woods, and that is why the forest folk do not use it. However, this is not true, and in fact there are metals of extreme purity to be found at the world's end, especially in regions where the woods rise up into wastelands and peaks. This is what I am told by those who know the Luthoses well. The preference for simple materials is because their people make such fine crafts that stones and sticks are enough for a reasonable hunting arrow. As for their armor-piercing capabilities, admittedly they are lackluster, and even the Aesti and Helisi showed this by defying Luthoses' arrows for extended periods in prior battles. However, these things are not absolute rules, and it is not the case that arrows would veer off course or bounce from exposed places like wrists and armpits as they did in the case of Amadokas. Detractors will ignore or deny these points, no matter how well attested they are. Instead of believing in this narrow explanation, we have to take aboard the wider point the incident demonstrated, that the powers of the ancient gods are not exclusive to one man, one people, or one creed. It is like betting on two athletes in the same race, often disallowed by those who have been hurt by such practices, but the gods and their lingering after images that people seize upon are not subject to rules such as these. It is the case that the Getae had heroes of old magic among their ranks, and Amadokas was one such man. This is the simple truth, and let not the similar titles lauded upon Pyrrhusades and company distract you from this possibility. I will explain more about the inner workings of Getae magic later. To return to our scene, after a few stadies of ridiculous pursuit, Amadokas was still unharmed, and the Luthoses were trotting after him powerlessly. Their only remaining weapon was to hope he tripped on a concealed rabbit hole and was hurt by the fall. Diotrephes watched from among the Greeks at a distance, and wrote, "It occurred to me that while we were in command of this army, our soldiers were being led away by the enemy's strategos as neatly as a dog trails his master. When I mentioned this to the prince, he said that it was natural, and that the reason people followed him was no different. I think he was talking about the powers of the old gods, but I didn't want to upset the men by asking about it openly." This last remark shows that even after all that had happened, there were those among the high ranks of Bosporans who were still unsure of the foreign trails they had been taken along. Pyrrhusades ordered that the army stop and make camp, while a band was assigned to trail Amadokas without assailing him further for the purposes of gathering information on his activities. In truth, some say, Pyrrhusades' companions went out with their weapons and tried again to slay the man, failing and returning with injuries they had to work hard to explain. Amadokas was provided a horse by local people and went to a place that Pyrrhusades had been told of by the Carpiani, the great city of the Getae, that is called Apollon. The Getae did not know why it was named so. The reason is because of the peoples called the Apuli, who lived on the hill the city covered 3,000 years ago. These people had been killed by the ancestors of the Getae, the Daxians, as some call this lineage, and because the magic of the Golden Age had not entirely been extinguished in those days, their deaths caused the world to expand, and a new land came up on the inner sea. This is how the famous Attila Peninsula came to be, although no one from that region would ever be able to tell you that. This city had stone walls, wealthy merchants, extensive districts and roads, and was the project around which the Getae kings had placed all their people in orbit. Pyrrhusades was so eager to approach this city that he hardly wintered in his camp at all. This suited the Luthoses, who preferred to slowly move the camp day by day than to be still for a long time and then move quickly. Since the army did not have many wagons, this nomadic style could not be achieved. However, wintering in the open proved easy enough due to the bounteous nature of the region. The lands commanded by Apollon were rich, richer than frontier places tend to be, and I shall explain why. Being cut off from the deprivation and war of the steppelands by the Sarmatian mountains, or Carpiates, while being so far from the coasts on the inner sea that the busier kingdoms were usually looking elsewhere, this region was able to benefit from the boons of civilization while not falling prey to the predators such powers breed. That is why the Getae tribal elite, in one form or another, had ruled these lands for a long time, and migrations to and from the sea or steppe had been made to pass through by sleight of hand, leaving the lands overlooked and bounteous for many centuries. With good land and a well-established city, it was no surprise that the Getae were not yet defeated. At the first hint of spring, Pyrrhosides made camp within sight of Apollon, but was not able to get closer because the Getae field army had assembled in the weeks prior in front of the city. This force was led by the king of the Getae, who was called Amadokas. This is the brief moment when he is worth mention in person, for his involvement in the downfall of his people was brief and bloody. However, the machinations he had been attending to while others were fighting were to carry on without him in such a way that his appearance in the drama cast a long shadow over that which is to come. He had been hard at work inside the city on a certain project we shall cover shortly, and because he felt that it was important that it be kept a secret as far as possible, he decided that he would not use the extensive defences of the city to his advantage in battle. That is why he camped directly in the prince's path and offered battle in a place that did not offer relief from those powers which had crushed the armies that attempted this proactive approach on previous occasions. A battle took place within 2 days, since the prince determined that the offer to engage was not a ruse. Alas, it should have been. After reading the descriptions of this battle, I will summarise them by saying that things went identically to the previous pitched battles, as the incident with Amadokas was not repeated. This had been a real concern among the soldiery. Since the victory came easily, and since Amadokas was killed, he fought on foot and could not escape the rout, any doubt that the Getae were outmatched was eliminated. The Bosporans went along behind a group of Getae survivors and made themselves busy with inspecting captured equipment or making slaves of stragglers so that they could not overtake the hunted too early. This meant that the city was obliged to open its gates to those who might be able to man the walls and win victory yet, which was a fatal mistake. The Bosporans ignored all projectiles shot from the walls and towers and stormed the open gate. Eyewitnesses say that there had been time to close it, but those whose duty was to control the gate fled when they sensed danger approaching, having left their minds and their honour in the mud. Others say that this was a simple misjudgment, since the Getae were not used to facing armies that not only moved on horseback, but who ran their horses at a sprint, since they had replacements running without a load to rely upon once their primary mounts tired. Either way, the city was not prepared materially or in spirit to resist occupation, and it happened so quickly that a strange scene unfolded in the main citadel. This complex was made in a Macedonian style, which the Greeks typically looked down upon, but in this case it appeared to have been improved and decorated by artisans hired from foreign courts. It had its own system of walls to protect it, which in turn made it slow for those inside to learn what was happening in the city, or act upon that information. Therefore, some of the first callers warning those inside of the danger was in fact the Lithosis riders themselves, not that a warning was given. As it happened, a great number of people not usually found in the citadel were present during this time, and this is what King Amadokas had been arranging before his sudden demise. The event was a meeting of representatives from all over the world, the likes of which seems impossible to most I describe this to. There were people from the island in the outer sea that is called Albion, who were almost naked, and there were people from the colonies on the coast of Africa, who were almost entirely wrapped in fine upholstery of various kinds, and in between these extremes were every kind of diplomat from courts and kingdoms large and small, including high-minded places like Rhodes, Crete, the Ionian cities, and what remained of Free Iberia. Summits of this kind were not unheard of among Greek cities or the many colonies of the same mother city, but this meeting of different worlds, who may well have never known of each other's existence before meeting in the long stone halls of Apollon, seemed beyond the diplomatic reach of a nuisance people on the edge of civilization to facilitate. And their motivation for doing so, even were it possible, is just as inscrutable at first glance. Yet we know what the prince knew, that the Getae had knowledge of cosmic matters and the will to use what they believed they knew to empower themselves, and that is the precise meaning of the conference at Apollon. That is not to say that any of this was achieved. Instead, an almost comical result came of the assembly, because all these diplomats were trapped in the citadel and informed that Prince Pyrrhosides was coming to negotiate whether the city should be sacked or spared. This was a practice the Getae would not have been familiar with, although it was usually not a mercy to negotiate fair treatment by the invaders, because the price to acquire this luxury was paid in permanent and precious things that a sacking would not usually take away, namely the rights of families to their titles. Because all present were aware that their plans, whatever they might have been, were upended that day, they needed to quickly come up with a way to placate Paereces and earn enough favour to at least leave with their lives. They agreed that they would create a farce to this effect, and the prince enjoyed it immensely once it began. Each delegation came before the prince at the front of the hall and made offerings of gold, silver and other goods suitable for treating with royalty. The presence of soldiers and tension of a city awaiting judgment ensured that no resources brought for diplomatic means would be hidden away from this tribute. Once this had been done, it took several bells. They began to offer up all manner of legal rights to Bosporan citizens in each and every territory present, such that it seemed like all these people were in awe of the empire and wished to invite it into their homes and treat its agents as honoured guests. And in order to maintain their charade, they became legally bound to do just that. Treaties were hastily drafted that altered trade routes and supply arrangements between all the signatories in such a way that they became not only more dependent on each other, but more servile to the empire, who were given first rights of sale on many goods in many places at the expense of native merchants. While the significance of this would not be clear at first, the empire would become extraordinarily rich because of this, and in a happy twist, so would Apollon in particular. But that is getting ahead of ourselves. The city for now was filled with soldiers who were waiting to see if the citizenry should be considered enemies, and they did not appreciate that Paereces took a long time to decide this due to the level of entertainment he was deriving from the many sorts of people he could speak to in the citadel. At dusk he emerged and decreed the following. The city would be taken intact, and all those people who were willing to become Bosporan subjects may stay. Those unwilling could take what they could carry and leave the following day, forfeiting the rest of their land and possessions to the army. A section of the city was designated a Capiati Quarter in order to compensate that tribe for its lost land in the affair with the Albions that occurred the previous year, and also to encourage some of their people to develop their skills and learning in a more civilized environment. This was not entirely to the satisfaction of the soldiers, so it is lucky that they were not accustomed to larger rewards after action. There are several large topics that we must stop to consider here at Apollon. To outline them, they are that the mystical Amadokas was present in the citadel and was able to negotiate and converse with Paereces on a number of topics. That there was a man from the ascendant Roman Republic in the assembly who would make a powerful impression upon Paereces, and of course that the capture of this city brought with it the largest hoarded trove of historic relics seen thus far. The Getae had indeed been collecting information pertinent to those wanting to bring salvation to the world. Now, after the quick and convincing victories the prince had won, he had the chance to peer ahead at his own destiny, and indeed that of the world. I shall do my best to explain everything that came from this turning point, because the next act of our history hinges on the day and the city we are discussing to an intoxicating degree.